So what is your favorite investment theme? Is it the momentum in global stocks? Maybe you want to target a specific industry sector or bond sector. Are you bullish or are you bearish? And how do you express that with a specific trade in an ETF? Here to talk with us about that is Rob Nestor at Direxion Investments. Rob, it's great to have you with us.
Thanks for having me, Ron.
Let's begin with the U.S. stocks compared to the rest of the world. As you know, U.S. stocks have been outperforming, and that's been good for traders in the Direxion ETFs that are linked to S&P 500. You've got 2X, 3X version, SPUU, and then SPXL. So why are U.S. stocks doing so well on a relative basis to the rest of the world?
Well, clearly economic growth in the U.S. has far exceeded the rest of the world. And the rest of the world sort of looks to the U.S. for that lead in a lot of respects. I think that we've talked a lot about Direxion. This is probably the most nervous bull market of all time. I guess in large part because of how long it's lasted and how many bullets they believe the Fed will have if it starts to slow down. So I think investors are starting to look at where areas have not done as well within that bull market and where they could potentially capitalize on that going forward.
Let's talk about relative weight trades, and that really ties into what you were just leaning into, talking about weighting specific themes or strategies over others. The Direxion Russell 1000 Growth Over Value ETF, that's ticker symbol RWGV, which has gained around 22% year to date, and growth stocks have outperformed value in 2019. Does that surprise you?
Well, it does. Nothing surprise me within this bull market, but you know what you see is over the very long term, comparable themes tend to perform closely over longer periods, but over shorter periods they can deviate quite substantially. And we've seen that tremendously with growth over value. Over really the last 5 years, growth has crushed value. And a lot of investors are thinking about, will that trade mean revert? Is there an opportunity with RWVG, for instance, to take advantage of what the possibility that value and growth will come back together over time?
Yeah, and that ticker symbol you just mentioned, for those that have a more contrarian perspective, because obviously, you know, there's both sides to trade. That's why you paired them up.
Exactly.
If you're just joining us, we're pleased to have with us Rob Nestor at Direxion Investments. Now, another relative weight trade is developed international stocks over emerging market stocks. That one has worked out pretty well. The Direxion ETF that plays that particular investment strategy or theme is RWDE. It's gained around 18% year to date. Now, even though certain emerging markets, if we slice them and dice them and look at them individually, for example, Russia, have done quite well, as a group, they've underperformed their developed peers. So
largely because of China, who has dramatically underperformed and has a very outsized weight in most emerging markets indexes. So people who have believe that developed will outperform emerging have obviously capitalized, as you mentioned, with RWDE this year. But there's also a lot of belief that that is going to start to shift. And you mentioned a couple of potential catalysts. Russia and Brazil have done quite well lately, and a lot of believe that turn is on. And in fact, RWED has outperformed RWDE in just the last couple of weeks, but year to date, the developed market's still ahead.
Yeah. Now let's get back to the S&P 500. Let's look at industry sectors, because one particular sector that has not really outperformed, it's actually lagged, is healthcare stocks. And talk about that particular group, ticker symbol CURE, which offers daily leverage of 3x to healthcare stocks. This is an interesting sector. Yeah,
so healthcare has been under pressure, I think, largely because the fear of certain potential policies, particularly as we head into the election year in 2020, and might that cause harm to classic healthcare stocks. But healthcare has typically been fairly staid and defensive areas, so a lot of people have gotten more comfortable recently wading back into that. Our view is it's probably a little oversold and is likely to do well going into 2020. But obviously, a lot depends on who's elected president and what those policies are going to be.
Yeah, good point. And you also have, too, within the healthcare sector, some subsectors, like pharmaceuticals and biotech. You got ETFs linked to those areas also.
Yeah, it's been a tale of 2 years, I guess, in some respects. Over year to date, biotech's got hurt really, really badly in the beginning of the year
Yeah.
and have rebounded quite strongly in the last 6 to 8 weeks. And so investors are noticing that and wading back into biotech. Biotech's very different than many of the other sort of sectors in that you have just this bifurcation of several very, very large biotechs and then a long tail of providers working on just one or two remedies in the space. And so it tends to have very sort of volatile attributes, which for traders is generally seen as pretty attractive.
Yeah, and also too, because there's so many different players, it's hard to pick the winners or the losers.
Exactly.
So playing the sector as a whole, many traders prefer to make that call versus trying to
very hard.
Making the individual picks. So whenever equity markets are trading at all-time highs as they are right now, it's always a good time to double check your portfolio to make sure that the risk character of the portfolio matches your risk profile as an investor and to make sure that that's correctly aligned. And others may want to take a more defensive posture. Instead of selling the entire portfolio that's long or that's bullish, maybe adding some pieces that are defensive. Maybe something like the Direxion S&P 500 Bear 1X share, SPDN, offers a really easy way for investors and even traders to hedge. Talk about that.
Yeah, and at a negative 1x, it doesn't require precise timing in terms of when you get it right. And I think a lot of investors are thinking about how do they effectively hedge the market in that regard. And that is a popular option for those that are nervous about where we are, which we're talking more and more investors about that all the time. There's also in the relative weight space a rather defensive play in RWDC. So what that does is overweight defensive areas of the market, healthcare and others, utilities, and underweights, intentionally shorts part of the sort of more cyclical areas of the market that have driven a lot of what we have seen. So it still is participating in the market, but it's overweighting defensive versus cyclicals. And people feel like that's a little bit defensive play that they might want to think about.
Yeah. The expansion of commission-free ETF trading by large online brokers, I mean, this has really been a absolute blast and bonus for investors and traders. It's been celebrated by everybody, including us. But it's more than just cost savings to an investor. It's also about flexibility. It's about having more choice. And for ETF investors, they're no longer constrained to limited menus because all ETFs on at least the major platforms, Schwab, TD Ameritrade, Fidelity, and others, are now trading without a commission online. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's just the next chapter, frankly, in this just absolute multi-year push in bringing down the cost of investing. I think a lot of that is because technology has made it much more efficient to be able to bring down that cost, but it's also contributed just the visibility for investors on where that cost is in the portfolios, whether it's single basis point index funds, whether it's no transaction fee, stock and ETF access. It's just been an incredible role. And we think it's just great for investors overall. We're probably closer to the end than the beginning in terms of that push, but I think there's still more cost probably to squeeze out.
Well, we really appreciate you taking the time, Rob, for sharing your insight with us. Again, you just heard from Rob Nestor at Direxion Investments. I'm Ron DeLegge. This is the ETFguide YouTube channel. And be sure to follow us at Twitter, our Twitter handle at ETFguide. And you can subscribe to our channel, post your comments. And be sure to go to Direxion Investments. We posted the link in this video. And you can check out more about thematic trades as well as leveraged long and short trades to add to your arsenal.